Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to part 2 of our Conceiving a Study Research Project Fulbright Friday presentation. So if you joined us the last time, we started with a presentation about how to get started thinking about the kinds of projects that would be good for proposing as part of a Fulbright study research project. And today we're going to continue that conversation and dive a little bit more deeply into what exactly goes into this process of conceiving a project, and then give you some guidance in terms of how to get started with the writing, which for many students is often one of the most difficult parts of the process, just getting going on things. So welcome. Just to introduce myself and my colleagues, my name is Dr. Laurie Staff. I am Assistant Director and Faculty Mentor in the Office of National Scholarship Advisement, and I advise on all the Fulbright Awards, including all the graduate awards. And with me today is Dr. Mitch Habza, who is our Senior Program Manager for Graduate Awards, who also will be available to help anyone working on these kinds of study research projects, as well as graduate programs that Fulbright covers. And also with me today is our other faculty mentor, Dr. Nilanjana Bhattacharya, who will be assisting students also with all types of Fulbright awards. So you can come and see either herself or myself about any of the types of Fulbright awards. And she will be cycling off, unfortunately, at the end of this semester, but we will have a new faculty mentor coming in, Dr. Irina Levin, who will also be available to all students applying for any kind of Fulbright awards. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start talking about what we're here today to focus on, and that is the Fulbright Open Study Research Awards. So this is an award in which students will choose the type of award based on the project that they want to do. It's an independent project. You will design it yourself, and you work with individuals in other countries, either at institutions of higher education, or in some cases, nonprofit institutions or community organizations, in order to conduct that project and complete it successfully. So there are different kinds of awards for graduate study as well, but we aren't going to cover those today. We did cover those in another workshop on graduate program awards, but a lot of the advice that we are going to give you today can be applied to those other types of graduate awards. And then there are all kinds of very country-specific awards that are only offered in a certain place, that are very, very narrowly designed. And you can apply to those as well. And in many cases, again, the advice that we're going to give you today is applicable for those types of awards as well. So the most important component of your study research award proposal is the statement of grant purpose. This is a 2-page essay with standard formatting that will give you the opportunity to explain in detail exactly what it is that you propose to do, with whom, exactly when you are going to carry out the project, exactly where you will carry out the project, why you are going to do it. In other words, why is it important? What is the so what factor? And the specifics, the how, the methodologies that you will employ in order to conduct your research project. In addition, this is a little bit different than maybe other types of awards that are granted for completing graduate type study research projects, in that you have to also address very specifically the Fulbright mission, which of course is about the commitment to mutual cultural understanding. And you have to demonstrate this very clearly in your proposal. And we're going to talk about this a little bit further. So it should also include a very clear indication of your commitment to the host country community. In other words, you will not be doing what we like to call parachute research, where you will just drop in, do what you need to do for your own personal and professional goals and academic goals, but what you're doing actually will have some sort of effect on the folks around you that you will be working with in that particular community. Okay, so what's really important about the proposal is that you address the key questions that you need to examine with regard to the proposal. And these, by the way, are the questions that the national screening committees provide to the reviewers who will be assessing your application and determining whether you should advance in the competition. And so if you're not addressing these questions sufficiently, then the likelihood that you're going to be awarded is pretty low. So we like to present you with these questions in advance so that you can start thinking about how your proposals are going to address all of them. For example, who are you going to work with when you are there? That is very important. This is something that we always advise students to start thinking about as early as possible, trying to come up with individuals that would be best suited to help you and making connections with those folks. And we'll talk a little bit more about how to do that. But essentially, a good place to start is with your ASU professors, the mentors that you have worked with, the professors you have taken classes with, people you've worked in labs with, other individuals who have helped you do research projects as you've gone through your undergraduate career, or if you're currently a graduate student in your graduate career. They can often help to connect you with people in the place that you want to go and conduct your research project. So that's a great place to start. Then you want to cover what it is that you propose to do. Obviously, they need to know very clearly what that is. Importantly, what is innovative, what is new, what is different, what gap in scholarship and learning is your research going to fill? That is vitally important. What will it contribute to your larger field or discipline? In other words, you're not repeating things that people have already done and telling us things that we already know, but you're doing something that is going to make a contribution. Again, this is sort of the so what factor. Why is this important? What are your specific research goals and methodologies? How exactly are you going to carry out this project? What is the literature that you've read up until this point that has given you the background necessary to be prepared to move forward with this? And then what are the specific ways in which you're going to carry out the research? Again, what is important or significant about the project? And please do not forget this very vital part of the Fulbright application, and that is how it will contribute to the Fulbright mission of promoting mutual cultural exchange and understanding. And then you need a timeline that indicates that you'll be able to carry out the project in the time you say. They're only going to give you funding for a limited amount of time. Usually these grants are between 9 and 12 months. So can you finish everything that you want to accomplish in the time frame that the funding covers? So I'm going to now turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Bhattacharya, and she's going to continue talking about feasibility issues.
Hello, all. So one of the things that people are looking at when they're evaluating your application for the Fulbright is whether you have a sense of how to implement it. So thinking about the technical details, thinking about the location, thinking about all the different conditions that could affect your project. All these things are going to take a lot of research on your part, a lot of preparation on your part, and you can never really anticipate everything that you're going to encounter once you get there. But assuming that you are ready to take care of transitions and ready to adapt to whatever is there is really a very important thing to convince your evaluators of. So where you conduct your study or research and why you choose this location, obviously should be important for the type of research that you're trying to do. It shouldn't be something that you could easily do in the US, for instance. But it is a case that you want to carry out your research in a place that is actually possible for you to spend time in. So So going to the middle of a war zone, for instance, might not be the best place to think about your research, or going to a really, really isolated place where you don't have a lot of infrastructure support might not be a really great place to choose to do your research, for instance. So thinking about whether or not the place itself is a possibility and sort of a logical place is important. So why you want to undertake the project really sort of relates to what Dr. Stoff was talking about before. Go to the next question, which is the qualifications for carrying out this project. The reason why this actually relates to feasibility is that you need to have a skill set, you need to have experience in doing the type of work that you have done for a long time. You need to be ready to sort of get into your project when you are there. You don't want to have to sort of spend a whole bunch of time that would have been valuable to spend on your project trying to learn really introductory kinds of methods, or getting a feel for something that's very new that you really could have done here. So demonstrating that you have competence and expertise in different kinds of instruments, for instance, or different kinds of data collection and analysis methods. All these kinds of things are important to think about as qualifications, in addition to other projects that you've worked on and other sort of related experiences that you would have had that demonstrate that you're competent in these particular skills and are ready to do the work on this project. Why, I'm sorry, I'm trying to get rid of, okay, why does the project have to be conducted in the country of application? As we said before, it needs to be a place when you're choosing your project that really is probably the only place you could carry out this research. Thinking about whether or not it helps you further in your academic or professional development is also really important. So if people are giving you money and you are just going to do a project and then leave it behind, it doesn't really serve the rest of people around you very much. If we're thinking about the Fulbright mission of sort of creating mutual understanding and greater collaboration between our countries, if you simply go there and do your thing and then come back and don't have any more contact with the area or the issues that you're working on, no one really benefits from that. So they're looking for people who have a demonstrated commitment towards the issue that they're working on, that are going to be thinking about ways in which this can develop even after they return. How you are going to engage your host country community is also a very big part of the application that sometimes people unfortunately only think about as an afterthought, but try to demonstrate that you want to actually relate to the people there. You want to spend time with the people there and learn from them is important. That you're interested in the area and the location and what it has to offer. All these things are important. So thinking about what you have to contribute to that community, how you can actually propose activities or different kinds of projects, perhaps with the community that are going to be related to your particular skills and interests, and also demonstrating what you plan to do as an active person in that community is important for the application. Thanks. If you have the next slide, please. Okay, so this next question, how the culture and politics of the host country impact the work? As we were talking about, there are safety considerations, which are very important, but it's also the case that you want to do the kind of work that is going to be supported. So if you were interested, say, in pursuing something in journalism and you went to a country that is really quite low on its rating for protecting journalists and sort of being committed to free speech and the free press, that wouldn't make sense for you to go to that country. You wouldn't be able to do your job very well, and you might actually also endanger yourself as well as the people that you're working with if you're doing the kind of work that you want to do. So you really need to think about the particular culture, particular politics of the country and how they're interacting with what you are looking at. It's also the case that you need to figure out whether or not the country can actually support the project. Do you have access to the kinds of materials and resources that you need to carry out the project? Is it the case that you can actually even sort of talk to the people that you need to talk to? Can you travel around the country? Is there sufficient infrastructure for you to be able to do research in the locations that you need to? So those are very practical questions, but things that you can establish if you do some research ahead of time. The next question, have you established a strong affiliation with someone who has knowledge of the research topic and access to other appropriate contacts in the field? This is a really important thing that you can't really do instantly. So it's one of the things that you really want to think about early on. The more that you can try to connect to somebody who knows somebody, the better. The alternative would be just trying to find somebody who knows this topic and basically writing them an email and hoping that they'll answer back. But most of us are kind of overwhelmed with emails. So generally, this is easier to do if you were to approach your advisor or mentor and in this topic and ask them if they have any particular contacts in that area, or if they know anybody who's working in that area who might be able to connect you to people in that area. So generally, those people are difficult to locate. So you have to do a little bit of work, but more importantly, you need to allow yourself some time to set up those connections and to nurture those connections so you have a relationship of trust. So we already talked a little bit about people having the necessary expertise and background. This would also include language skills. If you are going to a place where people do not speak English and which you don't necessarily have people around you who can translate, you're not going to be really able to carry out all those participant interviews that you have planned. It doesn't really matter how much or whether you have IRB approval, but actually you wouldn't have approval if you can't speak the language and the people you're proposing to interview can't speak the language either. So that you need to sort of establish as part of your expertise. It's also the case that you need to demonstrate flexibility, adaptability, and cultural competency. The flexibility and adaptability part is super, super important. So it's almost always the case. In fact, it's universally the case. I don't know anybody who hasn't encountered doing research in another country, just landing there and finding out that things are completely different than what you thought they would be, and having to think really quickly on your feet as to how to make the best of this new situation that you didn't anticipate. So the more that you're able to think about all the different conditions that could affect how you're doing your research ahead of time, the better. So if you don't actually have your plan A in front of you, you might have a plan B or a plan C or plan D in case of things changing on you really fast. You also want to be able to demonstrate that you understand how to interact with people in a respectful way. You want to be sort of aware of their particular cultural traditions and belief systems. So all of these things are really important to establish within your application as well. Lastly, this is something that Dr. Stoff talked about. So can the proposed activities be accomplished in the time allotted? Is it clear what specific actions or activities will occur? So as Dr. Stoff said, it's necessary for your research project to be scaled to the time that you have available that they're funding you for, which is limited. And you have to usually scale a little bit with caution and be a bit generous in how long you think things are going to take, because generally they take longer. But on the flip side, it is the case that if you have a project that wouldn't take more than a month really to complete in the area, or it doesn't really require your being in the area for more than a month, it's not going to really make a good impression on the Fulbright committees who are evaluating your project, because they're giving you a lot of money. So they're giving you that money because they think that you are the only person, or you're the best person rather, to carry out that research that needs to be carried out at that particular place outside the US. So that's what they're funding. And you're going to need to think about all the different kinds of steps and processes that are involved in your project, whether it is data collection, whether it is sort of identifying potential interviewees, whether it is sort of visiting a particular research site. All of these things like how long it actually takes to get to the research site, how long it takes to travel there, how long it might take you to find an apartment when you first go. All these things are things that are practical things that affect the amount of time that things will take. So being aware of all the different components of your project and all the different practical considerations that are associated with those components is important. And the more information that you can sort of prepare and be able to refer to in your application, the better. Thanks. Dr. Stoff, I believe we're back to
Sorry.
you.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. We're going to shift now to giving you some examples of some of the projects that students have proposed in the past that have been successful in securing Fulbright awards. And we intend this part to be a little bit more interactive, not just us talking at you. I do want to just set things up a little bit for you to give you some context to understand what it is that we're presenting. So these are abstracts that you will have to submit as part of your Fulbright application, which distill and present the most pertinent information about the project, about what it is that you're going to accomplish and how it is that you're going to accomplish, and are the things that the in-country committees will be most focused on. So you really are writing for both an audience of reviewers here in the US that are part of the national screening committees, made up mostly of academics who are in fields of international studies and language studies and different area studies, not necessarily experts in your field. So that's very important to understand, that you should avoid jargon that is specific to your discipline because they may not recognize that. And then in-country committees that are made up of members of the Fulbright Commission in those countries, members of the US Embassy, or other institutions in the country who are representatives of that particular nation. So you want to be able to appeal to both of those audiences. The important thing about the abstract is to understand that this is really the last stage that you will complete in the process of completing the application, because you will first need to write the proposal, the 2-page proposal. You cannot write an abstract of something that is not fully fleshed out yet. The abstract will, again, pull out and distill the things that are the most important. So you're going to do these last. However, because there's really super important parts of the application that we don't want to forget about, and because they present a nice capsule to indicate how applicants have presented their research in compelling ways, we thought they would be good things to share with you rather than long 2-page proposals, which would take you forever to read. So take a minute and just read through this first example that we have, and I will open it up to the attendees to just give us some feedback. What do you think this particular example does well? Does it convey all of the things that we've just been talking about? How does it contribute to the Fulbright mission? You know, what are the things that you think it does well? And feel free to unmute yourself and share any ideas or write things in the chat if you prefer. Anyone have any thoughts? Or fellow panelists, do we have any thoughts?
I think one of the strengths of this abstract is that I think it does a really good job of establishing terminology. So it explains that there's an acronym for Alzheimer's disease. It explains what an APP is, and then it unpacks how that's going to unfold in the research. And I think it's organized really well. So we go from like, here's these big ideas, here's what I'll be doing in country, and it concludes with a description of what they're going to do for host country engagement. So it's not just focused on the research itself, but holistically on what they're proposing in the application.
So I want to actually second everything that Dr. Hopsa was saying. I also really like the fact that they're focused on the outcome of the project being something that will continue. So namely this expanded collaboration with the US and this ICRC in the Czech Republic. So thinking about the fact that's just such a perfect example of what the Fulbright mission is committed to. So it's quite beautiful to see that and see that transition into how it is going to define their relationship to the community.
And I think it also does a really good job of connecting the research to the community engagement project. So it makes a lot of sense. It's not something that's totally coming out of left field that has no connection. So it really does satisfy this idea of going there, not just to perform research that will be helpful to you as an individual in advancing your own career goals, which I think this person does fairly well demonstrate, but also that it's going to have some impact on the community and it's going to create strong connections. That is exactly what Fulbright wants to see. Okay, any other thoughts on this one? All right, let's look at the next example. Whoops, sorry, went too fast. So this one is a public health project in Hungary. So take a few minutes just to read it over, and then we'll talk a little bit about strengths of this particular abstract. Okay, so Joshua, thank you so much for your comment. Joshua says this one makes it very clear what the connection between the country and the research topic is. Unlike the last one, I couldn't really imagine this happening in another country, and I would agree with that entirely. It does a fantastic job of demonstrating you cannot sit at home in your computer and do this kind of research, right? You really need to be in this place, and right away demonstrates the affiliation, which is super important to show that this person has really done their homework and they have systems, structures of support that are already established in the country that are going to make it much more feasible. And that, of course, is something that Fulbright is really looking for. Any other comments on this one?
Yeah, absolutely, Dr. Stoff. I agree with that. And I think, you know, speaking of how they did their homework, there's a lot of different connections here that are named. And so I think it really demonstrates the feasibility of the project. This student has made connections, they've communicated with other people, and that means that they can hit the ground running as soon as they land in country with working on this project.
And thank you, Kai, for your comment. It does a great job of highlighting how the people in Hungary and the Roma community will utilize what the student will start in country. It isn't just a one-off experience. It will continue into the future, even without the student being directly involved. And they did a great job of showing exactly what the impact they will bring. And that is really ideal, right? That this is something that's clearly going to benefit the place that the applicant is going to. It's not just going to be gathering research, taking it away, and that there is a really big so what factor here. Like that people are going to benefit, the people in this community are going to directly benefit from it. Okay, let's go to the last example. Okay, any thoughts on this one? Anthropology project to Ecuador. Also, I should mention that we were showing you examples of projects at different levels. Please do not worry if you think that you are not as advanced or able to compete with someone at the doctoral level. Your application will not be compared against students that are not at the same level as you. So they will be judged based on what level you're at. Any thoughts on this one? Okay, thank you, Josh. Josh says this one does a really good job at defending the necessity of the research in the greater context of the country. And I think even more broadly than that, you could see how the kind of research that this applicant is proposing can be taken and applied even to other areas as a case study that can inform a larger issue. That's a really great so what. And then I think it's also interesting how they start by going over the project, then go backwards to give context and end with the research question.
Kai's comment is also really helpful. It seems quite quite complex, but they summarized it so well for someone who frankly has no idea what they're talking about. I can understand why it would matter. For people who don't necessarily think about Ecuadorian indigenous populations, I agree. This does a really great job of trying to explain a very complex situation and distill it into language that we can all understand.
Okay, great. Thank you all so much for your very valuable feedback. So I'm now going to turn things over to our resident expert on writing, Dr. Habza, and he's going to talk to us about how to be a productive writer.
Right. Hi, everyone. So what we just looked at, those abstracts, those are the products of a lot of work, right? So we will not start with that. Your first draft will not look like the writing that we just looked at. Those are students who put in months and months of work into their application. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how to get started with that work, because I know writing can often feel a little bit intimidating, especially academic writing. And when we're writing in new genres, new contexts, we might not necessarily know what is this audience looking for, or how do I even approach starting to address what this audience is looking for? What kinds of details are important? However, I do want to say the good news is if you've already started mentally answering some of the questions that Dr. Stoff and Dr. Bhattacharya have posed at the beginning of this session, or some of the questions that we shared in our last session, you've already started the writing process, because writing is more than just typing. So it is more than just the mechanical entry of putting words onto paper, or if you're using a pen, it's more than that. It is thinking and ideation and talking with others and conducting research. That is all an important part of the writing process. And it includes revising, editing, and proofreading as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about the bigger picture of the writing process and how that works in a Fulbright application. One thing I think is really important to note is when we're thinking about ideation and talking with others and conducting research, that isn't just focused on the research project itself, but it's also getting curious about the country that you're going to and conducting research on the country and the culture. So for example, if you, in your free time, go to a pottery wheel and, and throw together some clay and make a pot, you might be interested in pottery in the country you're going to. And so you might want to do research on pottery in Taiwan, for example, and learn about that history. And is there something you want to learn? And so it's really important to get curious about the country you're going to as well as focusing on your research project. So we're thinking broadly here about everything that goes into the writing of the project and conducting research to put together a good application. All right, next slide, please. So how do you get started on the writing process? Where do you even get started with any of this if it's really intimidating? I know when I was a student, for the longest time, I would just stare at a computer screen and just hope that words would come to me and then they would come out of my fingers. And there's better ways to approach the writing process. And so instead of just saying, I'm just going to write a draft of my introduction today, it's important to set specific measurable goals that you can figure out what are you specifically doing and that you know what the results are. You know when you finished, right? So when it's like write a draft of my introduction, that is a little specific. We might know when our introduction is done, but let's try to even be more focused than that. So some examples of specific measurable goals include write 2 to 3 sentences explaining the background of the central problem to a layperson, and then take 30 minutes to do that, right? So that's a goal that's focused on a specific output, 2 to 3 sentences, and then a specific framework explaining the background of the central problem, and then the audience to a layperson, someone outside of your field. And so by setting those more specific goals in a time frame, then you can feel like you're making progress. I have 2 hours to work on my Fulbright application today. What am I going to do in those 2 hours? Setting some goals that are blocked off in 20-minute, 30-minute increments. Then when you're done, you can be like, you know what? I made progress today. You won't get done everything you need to get done. This is a work in progress that takes many days, many hours, but just working on it a little bit each day and setting goals in which you are setting specific timeframes, such as collecting key statistics that you include in the introduction, 20 minutes, that's conducting research, right? So again, we're not just focused on the writing itself, but on the larger parts of the writing process, collecting information, meeting with an advisor, talking with your faculty mentors, looking around online to see what you can find. That's all part of this process too. And you can plan that in your writing goals as well. Next slide, please. So earlier I mentioned that we would be talking more about the writing process broadly and holistically. And so it's important to think about when you're setting these goals, which stage of the writing process are you at? And I think of the writing process, not just my field, the field of rhetoric and composition thinks of the writing process as not being linear. We don't just go from brainstorming, drafting, to revising and editing discretely. We often move between these stages as we work on a document. And since the Fulbright application has 2 essays, the focus of our presentation today is more so on the statement of grant purpose, but you also have a personal statement as well. You're going to be moving through different stages in both of those documents. So when you get started with brainstorming, that's doing your research, taking notes, thinking about what you want to put on paper. When you get started on drafting, you move from that brainstorming to creating an outline, composing new content, but you're not going to do all of the application in one sitting, right? So you might do some brainstorming on the project itself, your research questions, maybe your methods, and then you'll start drafting that, meet with an advisor to start revising, you'll get feedback, but then you might need to start brainstorming for your host country engagement and what you're going to do to interact with members of the host country. That's going to be its own brainstorming process. Then you're going to go into drafting. Then you're going to go into revising. And so this isn't just a linear 1, 2, 3, 4 stage. You might have to go back when you're revising to start brainstorming some new things based on the questions an advisor gives you during the revision process. Finally, I want to add, I haven't mentioned editing yet, and that's because that's something that we should really do at the end of the process. What your commas are doing when you are revising and working on drafts doesn't really matter. We will figure all of that out when the content is finalized. I often compare this to the difference between remodeling a house and redecorating a house, right? So when we remodel a house, we're knocking out walls, we are making rooms into different kinds of rooms, maybe we're converting a bathroom into a kitchen, and it doesn't really make much sense to paint the walls of the bathroom and then knock them down the next week to make it into a kitchen, right? And so it doesn't make much sense to fix all the commas in a paragraph that might actually get deleted if we don't need it anymore. So we do the editing at the end, but brainstorming, drafting, revising, all part of a circular process that is nonlinear, and thinking about it that way, I think, can help release the perfectionism, right? And that's really what we want you to be thinking about as you get started on the writing process. That first draft will not be perfect, so don't have the expectation that it should be. We're not expecting it, and we don't expect that of you either. All right, next slide, please. All right, so thinking about breaking out of that perfectionist mindset is also part of being emotionally aware about the writing process, right? Think everyone has their own individualized relationship to writing. Some of us really love doing it and we accept those challenges. Other of us are intimidated by the process. And I think it's important to be aware of what our emotional relationship is to our writing. Maybe we know that we're not very good at it in the morning, right? So then maybe we shouldn't be writing in the morning. Maybe we should be writing in the evening, right? So having this kind of knowledge of our relationship can lead to more productive writing sessions. Finding motivation can be really, really hard. So how might you be able to find the motivation to do the writing? We'll share some tips later about how to do that motivation, but that's individualized. Where do you get started? How do you get started? And we don't want you all waiting until the last minute. So finding that motivation is key. Negative emotions such as anxiety can lead to procrastination. That is actually probably one of the leading causes of procrastination. It's not because we're lazy. It's not because we just don't have the time to do it. It's because we're actually maybe scared about putting things to paper, making something that is, concrete, but also getting writing feedback on it. I think many of us have been exposed to harsh critiques with our writing sometimes, right? And so that can make us self-conscious about our writing, make us doubt ourselves. And so something that we all try to do as advisors is be really kind, critically kind in our feedback. So we're not just going to say, this is great. We are going to give you feedback that's going to lead to revisions that will be critical, but we do try to frame it in a kind way so that we're talking about the writing itself and not you as a writer, if that makes sense, that we're just focused on the text. And so that, we hope, helps alleviate some of the anxiety, which can lead to procrastination. As you're working through your text, if you find that you're feeling really complex emotions, it might help to write them down. Like, I'm actually kind of angry that I have to do these revisions today, right? I thought that they looked good. I got feedback that says that they need some changes. I'm not happy with that. Write it down, think, and then process through it and then move on, right? I think it's important to acknowledge these kinds of emotions and then we can move on from them. And also anxiety can result from facing large, daunting tasks. So setting those measurable, specific goals can make this less daunting. So instead of being like, I need to put together a 2-page statement of grand purpose by the end of the week, that's a big, daunting task. That's a lot of work. We can instead be, okay, today I'm going to work on just the introduction. And here's 4 things I'm going to do in the introduction. I'm going to break them down by 30-minute segments. And then tomorrow, I'm going to work on drafting the methods section. And here's 4 things that I'm going to do tomorrow. Doing that kind of planning, breaking it down into discrete chunks, can make that whole process of, I have 2 pages that I need to write by the end of the week, a lot less intimidating. And maybe we need to not be focusing on writing 2 pages within a week, right? Just take it a day at a time, 1 step at a time, and that can make this much more feasible. All right, next slide, please. All right, so this is kind of a joke, but this is the breakdown of the writing process, right? And so look at how much time is spent staring blankly and or shouting at the computer, right? And I hope that these tips that we're giving you today can help you minimize that time and maybe make the blue a little bit bigger, right? The time actually spent writing. So when we sit down and we focus and say, this is what I'm going to do today, these are the plans that I have for today, and I'm going to know when I'm done with them, can help us procrastinate less and maybe spend less time staring at a computer screen or being distracted by social media or all the other 500 things that we have going on around us at all times, when we can instead just be focusing on our writing. Next slide, please. Right. So I said earlier that it's important to keep in mind what keeps you motivated. This is going to be individualized to every student, but these are some different methods for staying productive, and we encourage you to experiment with them. Figure out what works for you. So some of us are just going to be really time-based. Like, I can do this in 20 to 30 minutes. I'm going to sit down and do it. That's it. I have ADHD. I can't do that, right? And so I have to figure out how I can motivate myself in other ways. I don't generally get something done in 20 minutes, even though I say I'm going to take 20 minutes to do it, right? So time-based methods might not work for someone like me. However, they may work for someone who's really oriented towards planning and they know that they can do something within 20 minutes, right? Others are social-based. So maybe joining a writing group. We do a lot of peer mentoring in this for the Fulbright application. You'll be meeting with other applicants, right? So if you are someone who's more motivated by being accountable to others for working on your application, that might be a motivating factor for you. So maybe you want to make more appointments for drafting times in which you're meeting with an advisor, meeting with other students, and talking about your application. Some of them are going to be more output based, like, this is what I want to get done today. Maybe it'll take me 20 minutes, maybe it'll take me an hour, but this is the one specific task that I want to get done today. And if that method works better for you, then you can plan around what your outputs are going to look like and what your expectations are. But you always want to be reasonable for yourself, and you want to calibrate. If you couldn't get something done within the time frame you set, were you too high achieving? Were you too aspirational? Do you need to tone it down a little bit? But also figuring out what else was happening in that environment as well, right? So do you need to change location? Do you need to change the time of day? Paying attention to when you're really productive, when you're not, what might be distracting you is also a really important thing to think about when applying any of these methods too, right? Some of these methods will work better in different contexts, and it's not just attuned to the writer themselves. One that I think is really effective for myself is being rewards based, right? So when I was writing my dissertation, I gave myself $1 for every page I finished. Very cheap labor, right? But then after 40 pages, I was able to buy myself something that cost $40, right? So think about what your rewards based methods could be for you. What are some treats? What are some ways you can treat yourself, award yourself, and then work towards those kinds of goals? So if that's something that can motivate you, that can be really useful for a Fulbright application as well. And then, of course, mixed methods. Mix some of these, switch them around, figure out what works for you at what times and what stages of the writing process. And that can help you learn a lot about yourself as a writer and how to stay productive. All right, next slide.
Okay, so thank you so much, Dr. Habza, for that incredibly useful set of tips and tricks for how to stay productive. What we want to remind you of is there is a finite amount of time that you have, and that we want you to make the best use of that time. So the Fulbright applications have already opened. They opened on April 1st, which means that you can start working on them right away, and we highly encourage you to do that. We really, really want you to avoid losing the valuable time that you would have over the summer, where you may not have a lot of other commitments, although you might, and we understand that. But your schedule might be a little more flexible because you're not taking classes, or you have more time to devote, and use that to start drafting, so that once we come back from summer break, that you've got at least your first drafts on paper, and we can start giving you the kind of feedback that hopefully will help you move forward with your revision process. Please do note that you will have to have everything submitted to us by our campus deadline of September 10th. That is not a lot of time, considering that classes start for fall semester August 22nd, right? That is really a very limited amount of time. So we don't want you to come back on August 22nd and say, oh my, I need to write a 2-page statement of grant purpose and a personal statement, and get my letters of recommendation, my letters of affiliation, and complete the very long application and all the abstracts by the September 10th deadline. First of all, we would not wish that on our worst enemies, because that sounds like a terrible, very crushing deadline to have. And so we really want you to get started early. And second of all, you really want to be able to submit everything by that September 10th deadline, because on September 20th, we will conduct our campus interviews, which students always find that the hint of that, even just the mere mention of the interview, as a scary prospect, but please don't think of it that way. We really should call it committee feedback sessions. And those are made up of individuals who are faculty at ASU or former Fulbrighters or people who are experts in the region or the field who are going to read through all of your application materials, ask you some questions about them, and then give you very important constructive feedback on how to make your application as strong as possible. And then they will write you a campus committee endorsement that will go on the top of your application. And that's basically telling Fulbright that we as an institution have vetted you and we think you're going to be a great candidate for Fulbright, and that's really going to help with the process. So this is the time to start. I know procrastination is real, but this is definitely the time to start. So first thing that we recommend that you do is go to our ONSA website and to look at the resources that we have available there. Particularly, that is where you can watch all of the YouTube videos. So this video and many others that we've produced to help give you guidance through the process. And you can also make appointments with all of the advisors to start getting going on the project. The first step of which will be an intake, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. We also have our own dedicated ASU Fulbright site that gives you even more information, more videos, the timelines, things that are much more specific to just Fulbright, whereas the ONSA website has information about lots of different opportunities that we advise on. And then we really recommend that you read very carefully through the Fulbright US student website, and particularly the country or countries that you're considering for your application, to ensure that you see very, very specifically what they are asking for, because each country, each program will vary greatly, and there is no one size fits all answer to questions that you may have. It will often be, it depends on the program. And so understanding exactly what the parameters are, the requirements are, the expectations are for the particular country is very, very important. So look through the award search tool, read the country profiles, read all the data about the various awards that are out there in order to understand them better. So as I said, next step for you is to go to our website, make an appointment with one of the advisors, select the award type. So this presentation, again, was on Study Research and Arts Awards. If you haven't quite decided yet which of the awards you're interested in, you can do multiple intake appointments. But the very, very first thing you need to do is do an intake. That is step one. So don't be confused by, there's another option for the next step, which is starting your application. That is not actually the first step. That's the second step. The first step is the intake, where you'll meet with one of us. We'll talk you through all of the aspects of the program. We'll help you if you're juggling between various award types, various countries. We'll help you to narrow down your choices. And then we will give you a little bit of homework to take away. And then we will ask you to make another appointment with us within about 2 weeks of that original intake appointment to really get started on the application process. Intakes are done in a group setting. So you may be by yourself, but more likely you'll be with 3 or 4 other students who are also considering applying for the Fulbright. They are always on Zoom, and that allows us to reach all of the students that we have at ASU's very large student body that are now about half online and at all 4 of our campuses. But at the very least, you should come thinking about what countries you're thinking about applying, why you are narrowing it down to those, what program you think will best suit the things that you want to do, and any questions that you may have after you've watched our Getting Started video. So please do watch that video. So we want to thank you very much for joining us today. We do have a few minutes left. If you have any questions, if you want to follow up with anything, ask us anything individually, we're more than happy to answer those questions. Maybe for those of you who are in this meeting, you could share with us a little bit about your thinking, where you might want to apply, what kind of projects you're thinking about.